Hi, I'm Frankie, and in this video, I'll share how you can create a custom API tool for your Azure AI agents. We'll first look at how to do it in the Microsoft Foundry Portal, and then we'll look at how to do it in Visual Studio Code. Let's dive in. So traditionally, when we think about the way a user interacts with a large language model, we first kind of think of the traditional chatbot, where it's just knowledge that it has baked into the large language model's model based on a set of training data, which would be the internet and the copious amounts of data, where a user just asks a question and the chatbot just answers on its behalf. We've gotten more sophisticated with RAG and adding knowledge and things like that. But when it comes to what makes an agent, that's where we introduce tools. So a tool, just like knowledge, is where a user interacts with the agent, and the agent then interacts with tool, or it could interact with knowledge, and then the tool responds back to the agent and then back to the user. So this is the way an agent actually becomes an agent and not just a chatbot, is that it takes some sort of action on your behalf by triggering some sort of tool. Knowledge can be added and something can still be called a chatbot, but as soon as you add additional functionality or executionable code or actions, then it really becomes an agent. A few prerequisites of what you're going to need to get started is, for the Microsoft Foundry part, you're going to need an Azure account. And for the Visual Studio Code part, you're going to need Visual Studio Code, an Azure CLI, and Python installed on your machine. I'll have links in the description on how you can get started creating your first free Azure account, and links to download the others as well. To get started, I do have a resource group that I've already created. I'd encourage you to create a resource group and then head over to ai.azure.com, where we'll be in the Microsoft Foundry Portal. Now, in the Microsoft Foundry Portal, there is a new experience for the Microsoft Foundry Portal, and that's what this is here. When we go over to Start Building, what I'm looking at right now is what was previously called Azure AI Foundry, and now the new name is Microsoft Foundry. So we'll come over to the new experience by clicking the Start Building. We'll go ahead and create a new project. We'll use the advanced options. We want to make sure we choose the resource group that we created and everything. Let's go proj.esus. That looks good. Project AIS for EUS2 for ECUS, MS Foundry, demo. This is the resource that's going to be created. We'll make sure that demo is in there, which means some of this might be truncated because the Microsoft Foundry resource name likes to be a certain set of characters, but that's okay because we will have the core naming conventions that we want in here. I'm going to choose the Azure subscription one, make sure the same region's proper. Let's make sure we're choosing the right resource group. Oops, a little bit of an error there. Demo, that's the one we want. All right, everything looks good. Let's create this project. We'll wait a few minutes and then come back when this project is done being created. All right, our project is done being created. Now within the new Microsoft Foundry Portal, let's go up to Build. We're going to create our first agent. I'll call it My Email Agent 01. Because the custom API tool we're going to create is a tool that will send information in a JSON format so that another tool or automation could get kicked off to actually send an email. So this is a tool I've used to actually send emails from an agent. If you want to see my email reminder agent video, I'll put a link to that up here somewhere and in the description of the video. Now, when I create this agent in the Microsoft Foundry Portal, already there's a default deployment of GPT 4.0 that's created for me. You can see that deployment if you go over to the models and see that this GPT 4.0 deployment is already available. I want to use a smaller model so I can just get faster responses. So I'm going to deploy a base model. I'll do GPT 4.0 mini. select this, deploy it. I'm happy with the defaults. Now we can use this GPT-4o mini model. I'll go back to my agent, choose that model. Now let's input a prompt here. I've already pre-created these instructions. All right, so now let's add in our tool. Go to Custom Tools, OpenAPI Tool. Connect your Azure AI agent to an external API. This is the one we want. We'll go ahead and create. Now you'll name your tool. This is going to be the actual tool name when we think about listing your tools. We'll call this Simple Email Open API Tool. Description of the tool is what this actually does. This is more for ourselves. This is not yet for the agent. Sends JSON body with email data. And now the authentication methods, there's anonymous, so you don't actually need to authenticate into the API that you're connecting to. Connection, where if you need some sort of API key to connect to your API, you're going to need to use this. And managed identity is just another layer of security that could be used within Azure if you don't want to use API keys and instead want to use Microsoft Entra ID in order to authenticate to the different services that you're using. I'll show you how to use anonymous and connections in this video. So first, we'll start with the anonymous connection. And I already have the pre-created files for our OpenAPI specs. So zoom in here. I have this anonymous OpenAPI spec. Let's close this down, take a look at this. This OpenAPI spec, it's using the latest. It has to be a 3-point something OpenAPI spec standard. There's some metadata. There's the actual server of what's being hit. I'm using this webhook.site, which is what we're going to use for testing. This webhook.site gives you a unique URL that you can use. And so this is where we'll actually send the JSON data instead of to a real automation endpoint that would actually go and send the email. So we're really making a pretend send for the email. We're not actually sending an email in this video. If you want to see how I do that, again, the email reminder video that I'll make available in the description, you can take a look at that. But we'll see responses for this webhook.site show up here, or rather requests that come in, we'll see here. For the post, I have the summary of what this is, and then the operation ID. This is important. It can't have any dashes or underscores because the agent is going to use this behind the scenes to name this properly, and it could be using dashes or underscores separately as it uses this in its logic. The description is, this is important now because this is where the agent needs to know how to use this tool. So the description for the specific type of request that's being made. So this takes an email subject and body and can then send an email. So that's when this is supposed to be used, is it takes an email subject and body. The request body is something I'm adding in here. It's not absolutely required. I'm adding it here in this circumstance because I want the agent to send a very specific JSON body to my API. An email to, an email subject, and an email body. And then I have a simple response. So we'll take this OpenAPI spec, we'll copy it over, and we'll paste it in here, and we'll create our tool. Then let's save our agent. Next, let's give this a try. I'll move myself over here. Send an email to Mason Stark to 111@outlook.com with the subject of this is the test subject and the body of this is the test body called my Microsoft Foundry Portal created. We'll send this. Then we'll check our webhook.site. It says the email was sent successfully. If you need further assistance and want another email, feel free to ask. I can also look at some of the data here, look at the debug and see that these tools were called within Microsoft Foundry. If we go to the webhook.site, I see a post was made, and I see the raw content of what was sent from the agent to my API. So that's how it works using the anonymous authentication method for the OpenAPI tool within Microsoft Foundry. Now we want to set up and try it with a connection. So imagine we wanted to send this to an API that required some sort of bearer token or authentication key. I'm going to create a connection here and add a new connection. We'll call it X API key. And I'm just going to enter some value 123, 1222, 4333, 444, something like that. So some just string of numbers, and that doesn't really matter what it is because we're not actually sending to a real API that requires an actual bearer token. Next, we're going to need a couple things in our OpenAPI spec. Now we have this new OpenAPI spec that's specific for using some sort of API key. We're using the connection authentication method. We need to add a couple things in here. The first is this components section where we add security schemes. Security schemes where we're going to add whatever we call this for our specific scheme, but it has to be of type API key. This is the only thing that is taken for this OpenAPI tool. So this API key is used for our API key header. And then the name of the connection that we just created, the X-API-key is what we're going to use. Now we need to also add API key header to our post request. We do that by adding a security section and an API key header. After this, we should be good to go in using this in Microsoft Foundry. So we're going to copy this over. Everything else is the same as the other OpenAPI spec. We're going to copy this and replace it and update our tool to now use this X API-key. Update the tool and we'll save this and we'll start a new chat. You always want to start a new chat anytime you make changes. Let's try this again. I'll send this. I can see the response, check the debug, see the tool is called, come over to the webhook.site, I'll click this, and here I can see the X-API key that was added. So if there was a real API that required a specific header or bearer token, this is an example of seeing it actually in play. All right, we've seen how to do it in the Microsoft Foundry Portal. Let's take a look at how we can do this in the code. Something to keep in mind is that when we created that connection here, that created a connection behind the scenes for the specific project to this OpenAPI tool. So we can see that tool connection right here. You can see it's used in my email agent right here. Go to our agent. We're going to want to keep some of this in mind when we fill out some information for the connection authentication method in code. So let's pull up Visual Studio Code. At the time of recording, it's using a pre-release. So you're going to want to install from these requirements.txt. You can take a look at these here on the screen. And if you want the code to all this, you can get it on the Azure Innovation Station online community. There's a link to join that in the description as well. Now, looking at the code for our file here that uses the anonymous authentication method for our OpenAPI tool, we have some libraries for the Azure AI projects. We are loading our environment variables. You're going to want to have the Azure AI project endpoint and also the deployment, model deployment. We'll grab those in just a moment and add them to our env file. We log into Azure using the default Azure credential. Right now, this is using my Azure CLI credentials. If you go to production, you'll probably want some sort of service principal. I'll add a link so you can see how to create that here and in the description. We grab the OpenAPI spec, we open it, and then we create our OpenAPI tool. We name it, we input our spec. It's going to be of type OpenAPI, and we're using the authentication anonymous type. Then, if an agent isn't already created, we create a new agent. If an agent is already created, we create a new version. We are going to create a new agent from code. We're going to call it my email agent 02. These are the same instructions that we copy and pasted into our Microsoft Foundry Portal. Then we add our tool definition that we created here. Then the description is more just for ourselves. Have a print statement, and then we actually create a response by calling the agent here. So this is our prompt from the user to send an email. So now let's populate our env file and then try this. All right, we have our .env file. Now let's populate this. By the time you see this video, I'll be deleting these resources, so I don't mind sharing each of these with you. In Microsoft Foundry, let's go to Home, and we'll grab that project endpoint. Put that in, save that. Then the deployment that we made. Go to Models, or GPT-4o Mini. We need the name of the deployment, not the model, just to clarify. It happens to be that they're the exact same, so it's easy for us. Next, let's install our virtual environment. We'll do, make sure we're in the right folder here. We are. I'll do Python. Make sure you can see this a little bit better. Python.m. Feel free to jump to the next chapter if you don't want to see how to create the virtual environment and install the proper libraries. VNV. I'll speed these up for those who want to see. Then we'll enter it. Scripts.activate on Windows. It'll be a little different on Mac. And I've added a README for you to take a look at those commands as well. Then pip install from the requirements file. All right, now we're in. We have our libraries installed. Let's give this a try. So Python, OpenAPI anonymous. We'll run this. With our env populated, we should see our new agent being created, and then our response. Agent created, my email agent 02. We should be able to take a look and find that in the Microsoft Foundry Portal. I see a response back. The email was successfully sent. For this one, this is a demo body from agent via VS Code, so we should see that. Coming to our agents, we can see my email agent here that was just created from Visual Studio Code. I can go into it, I can see simple email tool that I created from code. If I go to edit, I can see it's using anonymous. There's no description listed here because that wasn't something that was added in the code. Now we'll create one more agent from code using the connection authentication method. So within the OpenAPI connection.py, let's see how this is a little different. Let's bring myself over so you can see this a little bit better. So now for the file that uses the connection authentication method within our OpenAPI tool, everything's the same, although we connect to the OpenAPI spec that has the security scheme and then the security for the specific request. Our OpenAPI tool that is defined has an authentication method of project connection. We put in the security scheme and the project connection ID. It does have to be in a specific format for the actual connection ID. So now I'll show you how you can fill in these specific values now. So first let's fill in our subscription ID. We'll grab that in Azure, where we can see in our resource group we have our Foundry resource and our Foundry project. Let's grab this subscription ID and go back to the code. Let's add that in here. Our resource group, let's grab that. In the Azure portal, let's grab our resource group, copy that. Put that in. Next, we need the name of our Foundry account, which is the Foundry resource. That's this guy. This is what houses our project, and then the name of our project itself. But let's grab it from here. It's a little bit wonky. And lastly, the actual connection name, which when we named the connection, the name of it in tools is Simple Email OpenAPI Tool. So now we should be all set, so we can use the connection method for our new agent that we're creating via code. And we should see that API key when we test this out. OpenAPI connection, create a new agent, email was sent. This is done via VS Code. And we can see, done via VS Code, this a new request that was sent to our API. We can see the API key added there as well. This was just a quick run through on how you can set up custom APIs for your Azure AI agents. If you want the code to try it yourself, you can get it for free at the Azure Innovation Station online community. There's a link to join in the description. If you want to learn more about the OpenAPI tool within Microsoft Foundry, I have a link to the documentation in the description as well. If this video was helpful for you, I'd appreciate it if you liked the video and subscribe to this channel if you want to see more content like this. And if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the comments below. I answer every comment to help as many people as I can. Thank you so much, and I'll see you in the next one.